It is true that every time you climb on your motorcycle, it can feel like the most euphoric feeling you've ever experienced. So therefore, it can be a near impossible task to talk about favourite rides. But let's face it, we all have our go-to rides. Our guilty pleasure rides that we know will always give us that intense feeling of pleasure and satisfaction that can only come from riding your motorcycle. And if we do have to have a favourite ride, then I'd have to say the Antrim Coast Road and its adjacent glens, hills and green velvet coated valleys is right up there with the very best riding experiences I've ever had. You see, I've been riding this road since I was a teenager, and I know I'll still be riding it well into old age, as it's just one of those roads that I'll never tire of. And watching this video is one thing, but as always, I can never ever replicate on camera the breathtaking scenery, the elbow-brushing vicinity of the towering cliffs and many sweeping curves that provide the transitions from one awe-inspiring spectacle to the next. And yeah, maybe I am biased, because after all, I did grow up in this part of the world. But I make no apology for my favouritism. And based on the many touring riders that choose to ride the County Antrim coastal route every year, perhaps my unashamed bias is well founded. So friends, come ride with me as we travel across the Antrim glens, visit special places, immerse ourselves in the enchanting landscape, and, as always with the most memorable rides, there was no planned route, no time frame, no itinerary, no plan. It was just a case of, well, let's just see where the road takes us. Now, I suppose you could argue that the Antrim coastal route actually begins as you leave North Belfast, as technically, if you continue heading north, the sea will always be just to your right. But for me, the real coast road actually begins at the port of Larne. So my parents live in Isle of Magee, a peninsula that's only a mile or so from Larne as the crow flies. But despite the short distance, geography dictates that I have to ride approximately 10 miles or so to actually reach Larne by road. And as we ride to Larne, I want you to cast your mind back to my journey up from Essex to Liverpool, when I discovered my fuel cap was leaking. And you'll remember that I mentioned it wasn't the only drama of the trip. Well, after my Belfast ride, I noticed my handlebars had worked themselves loose. So after my dad and I checked them, I discovered one of the riser bolts had damaged threads which were no longer forming good grip. Fortunately, the riser thread itself wasn't damaged, so it was a case of finding a replacement bolt. But there's where things got complicated. You see, here in the UK we work in metric, while most Harley Davidsons use imperial fittings. And at this point, I'd like to say a massive thank you to Harley Davidson Belfast, and in particular Alan, who went the extra mile to find me a riser bolt in a box of random spares he kept in the workshop. And as if that wasn't enough, he even took a fuel cap seal from a new fuel cap in order I could resolve my ongoing fuel leak. So if you are in the vicinity of Belfast Harley Davidson, I thoroughly recommend you pop in for a brew and treat yourself to a t-shirt and maybe a new touring model. Although I never actually lived there, as a teenager I spent a fair amount of time in Larne. It was where I learned to drive cars and ride motorcycles. I also had a part-time after-school job, and one of my first girlfriends lived in Larne. Now, I've already said that Larne is a port. Sadly though, with the decline of the coal industry, the coal yards are long gone, and with little enthusiasm or demand to live in a town with little to offer, Larne has been in a steady decline for several decades. And of course, when social discontent grows, so does crime, and, as is unique in Northern Ireland, sectarianism begins to take hold. So sadly, Larne has become a town of deep-seated loyalist sectarianism, and as a teenager I experienced this firsthand. Remember when I said I had a girlfriend here? Well, the first time she took me to meet her family, they wanted to know if I was a Protestant or Catholic. When I told them my parents were Methodist, they gave me a warm welcome and told me only Protestants were welcome in their home. Now, if that wasn't shocking enough, when this girl's sister found out she was pregnant, she announced that if she had a girl, she was actually considering calling her Shannon. It's a beautiful name and is also a river in the south of Ireland. But after announcing this, her mother-in-law angrily warned her that if she called her child Shannon, she would have nothing to do with her granddaughter. So I suppose it was fortunate she actually had a boy. But it shows how deep-seated some people's sectarian hatred actually runs, that they would even exclude one of their own family over nothing more than a traditional Irish name. So I suppose it's no surprise that Craigie Hill is home to the world's largest bonfire. It's traditionally lit on the night of the 11th of July in preparation for the 12th of July Orange Order marches. Now I won't dwell any more on what they represent, as this video isn't about politics. But if it is something you're interested in, you may enjoy my previous video in this series, where I went for a ride around West and North Belfast. Rather than head directly up the coast, I decided to head inland through the Cairncastle Hills behind Larne. If you take the left fork after Ballymore's traditional Irish pub, you will eventually come to a car park. And it's near this car park that Ned Stark's Castle Winterfell was filmed during the Game of Thrones television series. Now it's well worth stopping in this car park just for the beautiful views. Although I don't think the young, shall I say, courting couple in a small hatchback were impressed. But if they think this is their very own romantic spot, well, let's just say I probably beat them to it about 30 years previously. Relaxed and enjoyed the spectacular view for approximately half an hour before heading back to the road, much to the relief of the couple in the white hatchback, who had spent the last 30 minutes staring daggers at me. And as I'd already said, I hadn't actually made any plans, and it was only while I was parked up that I suddenly decided to head to the town of Ballymoney for a very specific reason. Something I had been meaning to do for several years. Now the route to Ballymoney took me through the many farming and market towns that make up mid-Antrim. While the scenery may not have been as spectacular as the coastal route, it definitely came a close second.
that shine, rise from the ash below, from the silent show, and grow your wings, lift into the sound. They can hold us down, stand your ground. Raise up your fist tonight, one message toward the sky. Songs in our feet where the voices of streets cry out and shout. We will stand our ground. Breath from eternal lungs.
The small town of Ballymoney sits in the north of County Antrim. Now, with the nearby Antrim coastal towns of Portrush, Portstewart, Castle Rock and Ballycastle, it is fair to say that Ballymoney is largely overshadowed. However, in 2001, a memorial garden dedicated to the Dunlop family was opened, and suddenly Ballymoney found it become a mecca for bikers to come to pay their respects. So for those who don't know, Joey Dunlop was, well, until 2024, the most successful Isle of Man TT motorcycle road racer in history, with 26 wins. He also won 5 Formula 1 Motorcycle World Championships, 13 Northwest 200 titles and 24 Ulster Grand Prix wins. And his brother Robert was also a successful motorcycle road racer and another Isle of Man TT winner. Robert was also the father to William and Michael Dunlop, and it was Michael who actually finally beat his uncle Joey's TT record in 2024. The Dunlops were originally from nearby Armoy, and both Joey and Robert could often be seen testing their hand-built machines on the local country roads. And unlike a lot of modern sports, there wasn't a lot of money in road racing. The guys that competed did it mostly for the thrill of racing. But for me, what makes the Dunlops, and in particular Joey, so special was the down-to-earth humility and unassuming personality. No matter how successful he was, he always had time for his fans and community. He was never interested in fame or glory, and it's fair to say he often looked uncomfortable and self-conscious when interviewed on camera. But Joey didn't need to make statements. His speeches were best made on the narrow twisting roads of the many public roads he raced. And what a lot of people don't realise about Joey is that he's dedicated much of his life to helping those less fortunate than himself. You see, after the fall of communism in Romania and the subsequent horrific discoveries of the appalling orphanages, Joey was motivated to fill his van with medical supplies, food, clothes and toys, and then quietly, without fuss, simply drive across Europe to Romania to deliver his much-needed donations. He made this trip several times, never seeking publicity, and travelling as he always did, alone and sleeping in his van. And that's just the sort of man he was. But road racing and the pursuit of victory can be a costly business, and it came as an awful shock when Joey was unexpectedly killed while racing in a small event in Estonia in 2000. His death really did leave a massive void in the motorcycle road racing world. But more tragedy was to follow when his younger brother Robert was killed during a practice session at the Northwest 200 in 2008. And as if that wasn't enough tragedy for the Dunlop family, William was killed in 2018 during a road racing meeting near Dublin. The Dunlop road racing dynasty is survived by Michael, recently crowned the most successful Isle of Man TT rider with 29 wins as of 2024. It's a very poignant but beautiful memorial to the Dunlop family, and it's well worth a visit. And after visiting, you can always head down the road to Joey's bar for a pint. After Ballymoney, I headed back to the coast via the small coastal town of Ballycastle. Now, despite its relatively small size, Ballycastle does have a lot available for tourists. Every August, the Lammas Fair is held, which often attracts up to 60,000 visitors, and you can also catch the ferry over to Rathlin Island from the harbour. And if you fancy spoiling a good walk, there's even an 18-hole championship golf course. And like a lot of these small coastal towns, traffic can get snagged up. My advice? Just be patient and enjoy the sights as you make your way through. A few miles from Ballycastle is the massive Ballypatrick Forest. As a kid, this was one of my favourite days out. It's one of those forests you drive through and can choose multiple parking areas and picnic spots to stop at. Now, the forest had been closed to visitors for several years, and I have to admit I thought it was still closed, only discovering it being reopened sometime later. However, despite its spectacular beauty, Ballypatrick Forest also holds a dark and tragic history. In 1988, Inga Maria Hauser, an 18-year-old German backpacker, was found dead in a remote part of the forest. Despite extensive investigation, no one has ever been convicted of her murder, and to this day, the events that led to her death are still a mystery. She had last been seen getting off a passenger ferry in Larne and was intending to head south towards Dublin, but somehow tragically ended up in a remote corner of Ballypatrick Forest. And it's quite a sobering thought to realise that this would have been around the same time my sister and I were energetically running along the nearby forest tracks, while my parents unloaded the picnic from my dad's Ford Granada. Just past Ballypatrick Forest is a mysterious phenomena that is Loughareema, known simply as the Vanishing Lake. Now, despite modern geological studies, the lake is still shrouded in mystery. There are 3 streams which feed the lake, but none that flow out of it, and there is a sink at the base of the lake that drains all the water to an underground drainage system. This water then reappears some 2.5 kilometres away from a large spring into the Kerry River. Now, that's the science out of the way. But Loughareema is more famously known for its many ghost stories. In particular, the story of the coach and horses that drowned in the 19th century as they attempted to cross the fog-shrouded lake. Bizarrely, a road had been built through the lake when it was empty, so in the dead of night it was impossible to tell if water levels were high or low. And it has been said that on nights when the lake is full, a phantom ghost haunts the shoreline, and together with the prospect of the sight of a kelpie or a water gull, a walk around Loughareema in the dead of night is not for the faint-hearted. The small coastal town of Cushendall sits at the meeting point of 3 of the glens of Antrim, Glenarm, Ballymoney and Glencorp. And on a clear day, being only 16 miles away, it is possible to see the Mull of Kintyre in Scotland. And before turning right to head back down the coast towards Larne, we were reminded that tight roads, tractors and tourists are not a good mix. Only a few miles south of Cushendall is a spectacular Red Arch, which was constructed in 1817 by simply tunnelling through the sandstone cliff. And those of you that are Sons of Anarchy fans may remember it featuring in the opening scenes of Season 3, Episode 8. The Red Arch actually marks the entrance to Waterfoot, and despite its small size, even this village couldn't escape the so-called Northern Ireland Troubles, as in November 2010, Peter Wilson, one of the disappeared of the Troubles, was found buried on its beach. Peter was a 21-year-old West Belfast man with learning difficulties when he was abducted and murdered by the IRA in 1973. He was one of almost 20 victims murdered by Republican terrorists and buried in unmarked graves, leaving their families to suffer for decades without closure. But despite that somber note, just sometimes something occurs that reinstalls my faith in the kind nature of people. You see, numpty that I am, had forgotten to unplug my USB cable after taking my phone from the handlebars.
Excuse me, you have a cable hanging down there in the road.
Thank you so much, thank you. This is the charger for my phone. Thanks a lot.
And a kind-hearted driver actually jumped out of his van while we were stuck in traffic to warn me. And it's these little everyday acts of random kindness that keep the world going round. And we should all strive to do something every day that makes life just a little bit easier for someone else. Another one for you Sons of Anarchy fans is the small fishing town of Carnlough. The limestone tram bridge featured in the aforementioned episode, and the producers, somewhat cheekily in my opinion, pretended Carnlough was actually the city of Belfast. However, as you saw in my last video in this Northern Ireland road trip series, Carnlough is most definitely not Belfast. And aren't you lucky to have YouTubers like myself to keep it real? And on the subject of YouTube, I'm sure you can appreciate the amount of time and work that goes into producing these videos, both filming and editing. And it's for this very reason I'd be really grateful if you could show your gratitude by hitting like and subscribe. And while you're there, make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. So heading back into Larne, where the day began, we passed through the small settlements of Glenarm, Ballygally and Carnlough. By now I was getting peckish and decided it was time to treat myself to a local delicacy that I hadn't had in years. Now, when you travel, it's always respectful to make an effort to speak the local lingo. So in non-Ireland, anything that uses the word supper means chips. So fish supper, sausage supper, and on this occasion I decided to treat myself to a pasty supper. Now forget your artisan Cornish pasties, this is a proper deep fried Belfast pasty. It's made from, well, who knows.
So this is a traditional Belfast pasty. No one really knows what's in it. Meat and potato, I think. Yeah. Spices. Heading out. Oi, I'm trying to vlog, you lot. Shush. So Larne Harbour, that and Carrickfergus Harbour, they used to be a lot busier when I was a kid, because there used to be coal yards next.
And it's somewhat fitting that the day's journey ended in Larne, where it began. I had a short ride back to my parents, but I was in no rush. It was just nice to sit and relax, and take time to reflect on a memorable day. You see, memories don't cost anything, and the one thing we're all guilty of is taking for granted the limited time we have. Abraham Lincoln once said, and in the end, it's not the years in your life that count, it's the life in your years. So let's all start and add a bit more life to our years. So friends, thanks for sharing this wonderful day with me. And as always, ride often and ride safe.